Welcome to Chapter 3, Book 2 of Solve the Story. I'm your host, Tyler Attico, and I am here today with the phenomenal, the illustrious, the jovial and happy and just positive energy, Scott Pearson. Scott, how are you doing today, man?
Great. Happy to be here.
It's good to it's good to see you. It's just good to have you on the show. Last chapter, I had Kelly Fitzpatrick, a writer that we both know. And when I was thinking about who to book for this chapter, I was like, it would be really great to speak to a author editor, because editing is so important, I think, just in life. And so I thought it would be really nice, like, to bookend this kind of some discussions that I like to have. So, but before we get to your editing, man, because there's a long road before you get to editing. My first question for you is I would just like to ask, what was that spark that started you on your creative journey?
A childhood friend. This was back when I was in 5th or 6th grade. A childhood friend said that she was going to write a novel. And I thought, well, that sounds cool. Maybe I'll write a novel.
How old were you?
So, like I said, I think it was 5th or 6th grade.
Okay.
So whatever that
12,
is.
Something like that. Yeah.
Something in that neighborhood. And, I started writing a really horribly derivative sci-fi novel. I probably didn't get any more than 10 pages into it longhand, and it's long gone. But that was the start. Then by the time I was in 7th grade, I was like, I want to be a writer. That's what I want to do.
Really? So you knew by 7th grade?
Yep.
It's interesting because I have a recurring theme here on the show where a lot of the creators that I speak to, they say very early on in their life, they had something that happened to them or something that they saw or felt or touched, or some kind of conversation. So it's very interesting. When I don't know if you can actually recall this, but when you were actually writing that first masterpiece, right? Did you like during that time, did you think, oh, this is tough, this is hard, or you're like, oh, this is amazing, this is great?
I think like any beginning writer, no matter what age,
right,
you think that everything you write is gold, and you need experience under your belt before you realize that that's not true. You need to get some practice.
Right. Right. Wow.
Yeah,
all right. So,
I was just going to say that I started submitting short stories to major markets when I was in the 7th grade and just writing my first short stories. And of course they were horrible. I thought they were fabulous, but I know, now how embarrassingly bad they were. But, you got to just, you have the drive or you don't.
First of all, every journey starts with the first step. Second of all, you're in 7th grade submitting, man. That's really incredible. I was going to ask you, like, when did you? So you're in 7th grade and you just decide, this is what I'm going to do for my life, and I'm just going to start writing. And then so you actually, I'm guessing. Just tell me, did you actually like get the names of places to like submit to and send it out and do all that, or?
Yeah, I just looked at, how did I find it out? Because, I'm old. So
right, this is before the interwebs, right? This is before.
Yeah, this is, getting envelopes and putting a bunch of stamps on them,
Right,
and
right.
getting the return envelope to get your rejection slip back.
Yeah, what's an envelope these days? What's that?
Yeah,
Right,
and
right.
so, I'm sure I found some book on
I
Writers
bet you did go to
Marketplace
I bet you went to the
someplace.
library, right? I bet you went to the
Yeah,
library. That's a great
but
point.
I was also, I started subscribing to Isaac Asimov's science fiction magazine. That was one of the magazines I was submitting to.
Right.
And I really should try submitting to some of those magazines now that I actually know what I'm doing.
Same. Right, right. All right. So this is incredible, because what I think that shows, or one of the things that shows, is, you're in seventh grade, and you have this tenacity, you have this energy, you have this focus, and you're like, I'm going to do this. Did you get rejection letters back? Do you remember if you got rejection letters, or, if anybody said,
Oh,
"Hey, keep it up, kid"?
that's all I got were rejection letters, piles and piles and piles of them. And I'm glad I started young, because I still had the energy to keep plowing ahead in the
Right.
face of all of those rejection slips. It wasn't for years and years until I started getting any feedback, when I got to the point where it was worth the time of an editor to respond in something other than a form rejection slip. I just kept at it for many years.
Yeah. But that says a lot, man, because that says that it's in your blood, whether I watch documentaries or talk to people or whatever, it's always those people that say, I got those rejections. So I just didn't listen. I didn't listen to what the world was telling me. I didn't listen to what anyone else was telling me. I just kept going forward. And I think there are a lot of opportunities for younger kids to get rejection and not know how to take that and be like, oh, I'm going to switch to something else, or oh, I'm going to do something else, And like, that never happened to me. I never thought about doing, I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to bend the universe to this. And I think a lot of people that are still doing it, from a young age, because we just decided, we're going to keep going. So you keep going. What was your first professional sale, Scott?
This was in 1987.
You didn't have to do that, though. Okay.
So in a couple years, I'll be hitting my 40th anniversary of my first professional sale.
Wow, man. Okay.
And then, I had a very long dry spell after that sale. But so this was actually a literary fiction piece. It wasn't genre at all. It was this very small, quiet, character-driven story about this old married couple, retired farmers, set in the countryside, very similar to where I grew up in northern Minnesota. And it got published in a magazine called Minnesota Monthly.
Wow.
Which was it's the magazine of
Sorry.
It's the magazine of Minnesota Public Radio.
Right.
And every year they did a short fiction contest. And so I was one of the winners in 1987.
All right. So let me ask you this. How many times, well, okay, so it was a magazine, you said?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
How many copies did you buy, first of all? Or did your family buy?
Let's see. I bought a couple.
Okay.
My family bought a few. And so, I still probably have 3, 4,
wow.
That's 5 copies of the magazine.
Wow. Okay. Because I know what I did with my first pro sale. Did you read it a lot, or did you like, oh, it's in print and I'm reading it, and it's, this is my, did you do that, or?
Boy, I can't remember. I mean, I remember reading it when I first got a copy of it.
Right, of course, right.
And I also really liked the illustration. All the winning stories got a 1-page illustration to go with it.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, and I thought the artist did a pretty good job. Read my character descriptions and created the piece.
Okay, okay.
over the years, I've come back to it now and then. And it's actually, I have it for sale as a little Kindle, short story.
Okay.
And I've revised it over the years because as I got a little bit more polished in my writing, I discovered things in it that, gave it a little tweak. It's hard to keep your hands off of something if you go back and read it again.
Okay, we'll put a link later on after the show. We'll put a link in the if you give us a link for it, we'll put a link if anyone is interested. And I know I'm interested. I want to see what that was like. Okay, so you get your first pro sale, and you said that there was a space of time between your first pro sale and your next pro sale.
Yes.
How was it? Years? Was it how long was it?
Years.
But you were still writing and submitting. Is that right?
I was writing and submitting all the time.
Okay.
I was pretty structured at that point in my life. I would, as soon as it's like I had a list of the magazines of the markets I wanted to submit to. And by then I had shifted more into writing sci-fi stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, as soon as the story came back, it would just go out to the next thing on the list. Wow. And I cranked through things.
So can we talk a little bit briefly about that structure? Because it seems like that structure, just from me knowing you, has probably carried through till today. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sadly, it has not carried through. I had so many years of rejections.
Right.
So many years that I got to a certain point after several years where I just thought, that's it. I'm always going to be writing. Maybe when I finish a novel, I'll try to do something with that. But for now, I just thought I'm not going to keep submitting short stories because I'm getting nowhere. And so I lost a lot of my ambition and structure for really pursuing things. And then what snapped me out of that was when Strange New Worlds came around.
Ah, yes, Strange New Worlds. We're going to get to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it was just at that point I was like, well, okay, I'll submit stories to this.
To Strange New Worlds.
So only like once a year was I submitting things. I wasn't doing much else during the rest of the year because I was just so burned out on the rejection slips.
Okay, so you're burned out and you're not submitting. And Strange New Worlds is over here. It hasn't happened yet, right? So you become a bookseller with Barnes and Noble.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Because for me, this is all fascinating because it's not so much what a person does now, but it's the totality of the individual, right? That makes up not only them, but the soul of their story, right? So if you could talk a little bit about that and being a bookseller, and how that has influenced you, going forward.
Yeah, well,
how did that happen?
Well, first I just want to say I'm a lifelong reader. I mean, from the time, as soon as I learned to read, devouring every book I could get my hands on.
Sure.
And so one of my dreams, even though I went through these periods where I wasn't submitting a lot of stuff, I was still writing various things. And I always had this idea that, I always vowed, there were many years that I vowed to myself I would never, ever work as an editor. Because I thought that'd just take away energy from my writing. I won't do that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And so I just thought I'm going to get some sort of day job and do my writing, in my spare time. And one of the jobs that really appealed to me was working in a bookstore, of course.
Right.
I did prior to that, I worked in a video store. It's just like I love movies. I love books. I never did work in a record store. That would have been like the other thing.
That would have been right. Right.
But I, it goes back to the beginning of Barnes and Noble because Barnes and Noble opened their first superstore outside of New York, was opened in down in the Twin Cities in Minnesota.
Ah,
And so it was kind of an experiment. They were opening this store, and Sandra, my now wife, then girlfriend, she knew about this because she worked for B. Dalton, and then she had gotten, she was getting hired by Barnes and Noble in a different store,
right?
And she said, you should apply for this job. And so then, I got hired at Barnes and Noble, and I'd worked retail before. I was a writer. I was a lifelong reader.
Sure.
I was, so it was great. It was a lot of fun. And when that store first opened, in the early years of Barnes and Noble, the stores were very localized. Even though it was a chain,
right.
The people in the bookstores had a lot of control over what they stocked, and you could maintain a kind of neighborhood bookstore feel. As Barnes and Noble grew more and more huge, it got more corporate and more, the individual store owners didn't have as much, not store owners, but managers and stuff, didn't have as much control over what they stocked, because, you have to, when you're supplying, hundreds and hundreds of stores, it has to be more automated than when it's just a handful of stores.
Sure.
But I worked there for 4 years and loved selling books to people. Got to know a lot of writers. There was a very active writing community in the Twin Cities. There are a lot of mystery writers, a lot of sci-fi writers. I eventually became the manager of the genre fiction section, and so I was always bringing in local mystery writers and sci-fi writers and fantasy writers to do signings and readings and stuff. And it really, it just fit right in, to who I am.
To who you are. I was going to ask you, do you think that this helped you to kind of keep your pulse on, literature as a whole, and on science fiction? And even though if you weren't really submitting a lot, but it also allowed you to keep a foot in that world. I know I did cable work for a long time, but it allowed me to watch a lot of film and absorb a lot of story, and to just so we keep ourselves in those circles even if we're not actively doing the thing. Is that how you felt?
Yeah, because I'd go into this store, and compared to some of the stores now, it was small, but at the time it was the biggest bookstore I'd ever seen. And so I'd be in there and just be surrounded by books, surrounded by my fellow booksellers who all loved books. We were all just there because we loved books.
Right.
And then there were the writers coming in and doing signings. And, I would tell the writers that I was a writer, and I had some publications to my name. Right. So they all were very nice, treated me as a peer. It was very rewarding.
Wow, that's great. All right, so after that happens, if I understand your trajectory, editing happens before Strange New Worlds. Is that right? Your first editing job?
Even though I had sworn to never work as an editor, one of my best buddies in college, after college, he started his own little small regional press. And so as soon as he got started, he asked me if I could help him. Hey, could you proofread this manuscript? Could you, And so now, a couple of decades later, I'm still his editor on all of his books. And so what happened was, because I was just helping out a buddy,
right,
I accidentally created an editing resume. And then, flash forward several years, when I was desperately looking for a job,
right,
because I was the stay-at-home parent when we had our daughter, Ella.
Right.
And then when she started school, it's like, okay, now I need to get back in the workforce, and stumbled across this ad for a job for an in-house copy editor. And I had my accidental resume of copy editing, And I eventually got hired at that place, and then I was there for 10 years.
That's
working
nuts.
as an editor, like I had not to.
So the thing that you said I'll never do, you're doing.
That became a day job.
Right? Can you talk a little bit about the role of the copy editor, what the copy editor does for those that are uninitiated or just may not know?
The copy editor comes in between. If you're talking about traditional publishing,
mm-hmm.
you're going to have like the in-house editor that acquired your manuscript. And that person is probably going to take a pass through it. What would, or at least back in the day, they would. Things have changed a lot in traditional publishing over the decades. But
Right.
It used to be that your in-house editor would do the first big edit, the developmental edit, and really get the book in shape. And then after that, it goes to the copy editor. And the copy editor is primarily looking for any kind of mistake, whether grammar, spelling, punctuation, continuity errors. They're just trying to find anything that has slipped through. And then after the writer has reviewed what the copy editor has done and accepted or rejected the changes, then you're at the point where it's ready for the proofreader. But the copy editor, shouldn't be doing major changes. That should all have been taken care of before it gets to the copy editor. And the copy editor is just trying to, catch everything.
Right. Which is, I say often to everyone that listens to me, sorry about the sounds of the city, to anyone that listens to me, that we all need editors, and I think most of our entertainment these days is edited or has some sort of editing has been done to it, whether it's film, even theater has rehearsals, which is editing in a sense, Of course, all forms of literature and of course television has editing. So, can you just speak a little bit to what you see editing overall as for you, for Scott?
It's really your goal, whether you're the main editor or the copy editor, is you want to help the author achieve the best version of their book. But you have to, the primary thing is you have to be maintaining the author's voice. It is the author's book, and you are helping them, nudging them here and there. But sometimes I'll use the analogy that the author has designed the house, built the house, furnished the house, and then you're just coming in and just nudging a little bit. Well, maybe if this chair was 6 inches further here, let me straighten that painting on the wall. Let me do a little dusting. You're just those finishing touches that it can be so easy. When you're the author, it can be so easy to miss some of those finer details because you've got this whole big thing in your head that you're trying to get onto the page.
Right.
And, things are always going to slip through the cracks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There's always something there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think writers, we all have, is really interesting. We all have like a certain level of tunnel vision. So we can't see, or we've been living with a manuscript for so long that some things just become a glaze to us and we just don't no longer see them. And that's why, editor is essential. A copy editor, managing editor, these are all essential.
Yeah. I've been working on putting together, I'm going to self-publish a collection of my stories that have been previously published in various anthologies over the years. And I've been working on the layout, the print layout, and every once in a while, I'll happen to notice, like a sentence or whatever, a word choice. And, it pops out at me because it's a story that I haven't read in 5 years or something. And so it's almost like it's not you. You're reading this story. And you'll come across stuff or at least I will come across stuff in my own work and I'll think, how did I write that sentence in the first place? That's so obviously, it should be in this order, or that word should be this
Right.
word.
It's clunky.
Or I use
Right.
that.
Right.
Yeah, I just used that word in the previous sentence and now it's repeated right here. Those little things.
Right.
A good copy editor is going to notice those things right away because they're reading your story with fresh eyes.
Right.
But, it's the kind of stuff that goes past you when you've been struggling through a story, depending on how many drafts you've already gone through before someone else sees it.
It's so true. Now you just mentioned self-publishing, and I think what's just another layer of interest, at least for me, about you, is that on top of your writing, on top of the editing that you do, you are really serious about self-publishing, and you get stuff out and get stuff put out. Can you talk a little bit about what it takes to self-publish and to because it feels to me, 'cause I've never self-published, that it takes an incredible amount of discipline. And I guess, that goes back to your editing days, but an incredible amount of discipline to self-publish and put material out there. So can you talk a little bit about that?
If I had incredible amounts of discipline, I would have a lot more out there. But I have some stuff out there. I find it very satisfying from a sort of a DIY perspective.
Right.
Right. And so I've self-published these books, a couple with my friend Bill Leisner, and I've got a couple I'm working on my own. But I design the covers, I create the covers, I do the interior layout for the print book. I do it all myself. And it's, on some levels, it's just ridiculous. But it does give me great satisfaction that that you've created this thing from start to finish. I wrote it, I laid it out, I designed the cover, and that's very challenging. I am not artistically inclined, but when I was working in-house at a publisher for 10 years, and I moved up through the ranks there. I started as the in-house copy editor, and then I became an associate editor on an imprint, and then I became an acquiring editor for that imprint.
Very nice.
And so during those years, part of my job was when I'd be working on title, or especially if I'd acquired the title, well, then I review that book every step of the way, in addition to the freelancers that work on it. But right. I review the layout, I review the cover. Sometimes I would conceptualize the cover because I would have knowledge of the book that the people in design didn't. And so I would suggest concepts for the cover. Right. And so I had years of experience working on layouts and covers with the design department. And then that all gave me the experience to think, I'm gonna try this on my own. I'm gonna try designing a cover on my own. Buying stock photos, putting them all together.
Right, and also, by self-publishing, all of those skills never recede. Right, they all kind of stay in the forefront. You're always constantly going back to them, brushing them off. And then that in turn informs, I'm sure, your writing, informs your editing, so it kind of feeds upon itself and keeps you fresh, right?
Yeah, all of this is very circular. When I started, as I was starting editing, I was a writer first, and I started editing, and especially when I got in-house and was working with so many different writers, of different temperaments, I found that being a writer really informed how I approached editing, how I approached working with authors, because I knew, I'd been on that side of the table. I knew what they felt like having someone look at their work and edit their work. But then the more I edited, then when I'd go home and work on my own stuff, then my editing informed my writing.
Yes.
Because I also got better at noticing these little fiddly things in my own work, the kind of things that I was noticing in other people's work all the time, you get a little bit better at seeing it in your own.
Yes.
You're never as good as, having fresh eyes, but you can develop self-editing skills that can help.
So true, man. I know I do a little bit of copy editing for friends. They, their stories, and I've always equated it to tools in my toolkit. The more tools I could put in my toolkit, whether it's editing or having these discussions and then having that inform my writing, it just adds another layer, another tool to the toolkit. I can imagine your kit, you probably have a tool shed at this point, Scott. You don't have the kit days are gone.
Well, it's very strange. I ended up at the in-house publishing job. That was all nonfiction. It was a nonfiction house.
Right.
And then when I ended up being on an imprint as an assistant editor, it was the military history imprint. They decided, the publishing company decided to start a dedicated military history imprint. They had previously published books in that genre, but they didn't have a special imprint for it.
Right,
and they decided to create an imprint and start publishing substantially more military history books a year. I didn't have any particular interest in military history, but they said, okay, here's what you're doing now. So I got a promotion, but it wasn't really like, they just told me,
this is what's happening. Right. This is what's happening. Wow.
Yeah. And so my friend that I had done editing for, he did regional history. So I was doing all this editing, but it was on nonfiction. But when you're telling history, it's still a story.
It's still a story, of course. No, it's still a story.
And the people in that, I would sometimes fumble a word. I'd be talking with an author and I'd say something about this character, and it's just like, no, not character, this person. But it still functions as a character in a story, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. And so that was another thing where my fiction writing informed my nonfiction editing, because it gave me a sense of you have to tell a story regardless of whether it's true or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, but after 10 years of editing nonfiction, when I was laid off and decided I was going to try to go freelance, I was definitely like, now I'm going to do fiction. I've done 10 years of nonfiction. I want to work on the same kind of stuff that I like to read.
Right.
And
no, so I'm imagining that storytelling, you're acquiring all these storytelling chops. So what happens after that? Is that during that 10-year period? Is that when you submitted your first Strange New World story?
Yes, all of my 2 Strange New World stories and my story in the 20th anniversary Next Gen anthology and my short novel in the Myriad Universes anthology, all of those were during my time working in-house as an editor at the nonfiction place.
Oh, that's interesting, Scott. Okay, so let's back it up a little bit. Why, first of all, why Star Trek? What is it about Star Trek that interests you, excites you? Why Star Trek?
In some ways, I feel like I don't really know, because I have no memory of when I didn't love Star Trek.
Wow, I like that.
And so, I mean, by the time I was 6 years old, watching the reruns, it already just like meant the world to me. And it's like, well, why, when you're 6 or 7, why does watching the original series, how does that grab you so much? I think a lot of it was the characters, the friendship. Yeah. I think that deep, that the deep friendship between Kirk and Spock, particularly, I think grabbed my attention. But then I also think I just loved space. I loved that it had aliens and that it was, I grew up in the middle of the woods in the country. And very early on, I became very fascinated with science fiction. Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov,
Right.
I was reading those from the time I was, I read Martian Chronicles when I was in grade school. And so that stuff just always spoke to me. And it's like, I think Star Trek was first, and then I started reading the sci-fi in print.
Nice.
I don't know, but yeah, I have just loved it my whole life.
Okay, and so then Strange New Worlds happens, and I've said it before, but I'll say it again for those that don't know. There was a 10-year anthology that Simon and Schuster through Pocket Books put out called Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And what this was a contest where anyone within the continental United States could write a story. I think they could write like several stories if they really wanted to, and submit them. And then they would go to editors, and they would review the story, and they would pick like the best 10 or 12 of these stories. And I did it, but no, that's we know about that. What I want to know is, so you hear, how does that happen? You hear about it, what happens? We'll talk about that, please.
Somehow I didn't hear about it the first year. Right. I don't know how that happened, because I worked in bookstores. I love Star Trek. You can see behind me, I own all the Star Trek fiction that's been published, legitimately.
All of it.
All of it. Except for I'm behind the last several months. I haven't picked up some of the books. But since I edit them, I've already read them, so I don't rush out and buy them right away like I used to when I was reading them as a fan.
Sure.
But so one day I, went into Barnes and Noble. This was, after I worked there, and I was, checking out the Star Trek shelf to see if there were any new Star Trek books in. And there was the first Strange New Worlds. And, I pick it up. What's this? And then it's, a contest. So I was like, a contest? How come I didn't know about this? I would have submitted. And, but then luckily, it came back year after year. So starting with the second volume, I started submitting stories, but I was usually only putting in like one story. I think I only did one story a year until I got included in number 7.
Right.
And then after that, I would do, 2-3 stories. But I could only, the rules of the contest were you were eligible until you had 3 professional sales.
3 professional sales. That's right. Yeah.
And I had that first professional sale from 10 years before then.
From before, that's right.
Yeah. And so by the time I got my second story in the Strange New Worlds, then that was my 3rd professional sale. And
you maxed out, brother. Right. Yeah. Wow. So you were in 7. I was in 8. And I didn't know you could submit more than one story, so I only submitted 1. So that's nuts. Wow. And okay, so Strange New Worlds happens for you 2004. Then I believe you submit again and you get in 2009. Is that right?
I was in number 9. Yep, I was in 7 and 9.
7 and 9. Okay. And so you're now writing Star Trek fiction. And can you talk a little bit about how you wound up doing other Star Trek fiction outside of just for the anthology for the contest?
Well, I attended the Shore Leave convention when I was in 9.
Right.
I didn't go the first year when I was in 7. I could have. At that point they were always inviting the Strange New Worlds winners to the con.
To the con, that's right.
But I didn't go because I'm a generally nervous person, and I just felt it was just too overwhelming. I didn't go. But then when I got in a second time, I was like, okay, I have to overcome my various issues and travel out to this convention. And so I got out to Shore Leave,
right,
and met Marco Palmieri.
Marco, right?
Who at the time was one of the editors at Simon & Schuster on the Star Trek line. Mm-hmm. And then he was kind enough to invite me to pitch for the 20th anniversary Next Gen anthology. and he contracted a story from me. So then that was my third story. And then he eventually asked me to pitch for the Myriad Universe's third volume. And I was able to, and he contracted me for that as well.
How did that feel, Scott? You're starting to be asked or invited to come back repeatedly to write in the Star Trek universe. How did that feel, man?
I mean, I still get shivers if I try to think of what it felt like.
Same, yeah.
Because, at that point I'd been a Star Trek fan for, 30 years or whatever.
Right.
And, just a raving fan with a wall of Star Trek books and, toys and action figures and whatever.
Right.
And now I was actually writing it professionally. Right. So, I mean, it was two dreams in one, because it's like I'm getting professionally published writing at a major publisher. So that's, a big step in the writing career.
Oh yeah.
And then it's also Star Trek, this lifelong love of mine that I get to contribute to in my own way. So it was amazing.
So and then was it right after that, or is there a gap when you are asked to come on as the copy editor?
Well,
you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, first there was one more bit of writing when Simon & Schuster was doing one of their pushes on ebooks before they really settled in to where they are now.
Right.
They were experimenting with doing original ebook only stuff.
Yes.
That wasn't in print.
I remember that. Yeah.
And so Margaret Clark invited me to pitch, and that became The More Things Change, original series, movie era original series novella in ebook. And so that was fun. But then at that point, they kind of stopped doing those, straight to ebook original things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that turned out to be the last thing that I wrote for them. But this was all sort of coming together around the time then that I got laid off. And so I got laid off from my in-house job, and I can't remember exactly when. I should have researched this before I came on. Because I can't remember, what year the ebook came out and how that lines up with when I was laid off. But so I'd published that ebook, and then shortly after I was laid off, they were looking. They wanted to get a new freelance copy editor for the novel line. And a guy by the name of Steve Breslin is a guy I work with. I can't remember what his exact title is, but he's the guy that sends the manuscripts to the freelancers. He needed to hire a new copy editor. And so he got in touch with one of his former bosses, the Marco Palmieri, who had by that time had been laid off at Simon & Schuster when publishing went through it was called Black Thursday or Black Friday or something. There was a thing when there were a whole bunch of people that got laid off at a whole bunch of publishers. It was a scary time.
Right.
It was actually right after he was laid off. Shortly after I was already writing my Myriad Universes novella, Honor in the Night, that he had contracted, but he got laid off
while it was happening. Right.
While it was happening.
Right.
It was very scary. I didn't know what was going on. My editor's been laid off. But so Steve calls up Marco and says, would you happen to have any recommendations for a copy editor? We're looking for a new copy editor, and we're hoping to get one who has, some serious franchise knowledge.
Wow.
And so Marco said, Scott Pearson, he's written for us. He's, a lifelong Star Trek fan, and he's working as a freelance copy editor now.
Wow.
And so they asked me, would you like to do this? And of course I jumped at the chance.
That's what, 2014, 2015?
So that was 10 years ago. It's been 10 years ago now.
Yep. Okay. So that's 10 years ago. So you're doing that. And at that time, I'm writing my second Strange New Worlds story, Deep Space Nine story, which is a Cisco story, which is in the 50th anniversary when he brought the Strange New Worlds anthology back.
Yep.
And you were the copy editor on that.
I was.
Yes.
That was a great feeling of coming full circle. I got into Star Trek because of Strange New Worlds.
Right.
And now here I am copy editing the return of Strange New Worlds.
That's gotta be nuts, man.
Yeah, it was great. And there were names in there I recognized, like you and John Coffran.
Right.
And then I was also getting to edit stories by all sorts of new people like Kelly.
Right. Now,
Kelly
at the time, we didn't know each other. But I was reading your notes and just a few little, I mean, it's just a few little things you did. And I was like, oh man, this cat is really elevating my writing, I was like, oh, this cat is dope. And I made it a point of when I went to shore leave that year of finding out who Scott Pearson was. I heard he was gonna be there, So yeah, it was amazing. Now, but I also should mention that on that project also, the lead editor on that was Margaret Clark. Yep. Yeah. Who also made great notes for that project. But unfortunately, recently Margaret has passed away. And it's been a huge blow to the Star Trek community, and I think specifically, of course, the people that I didn't know her well, but the people that knew her, but the people that I know that work in Star Trek Lit that knew her, just like blown away that she's left us and passed. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, she worked on the franchise. I hope I'm getting this right, but I believe that she started working on some Star Trek when she was at DC. I believe she worked on the
that's
Star Trek comic book when DC had the license.
That's right.
And then she eventually moved to Simon and Schuster and started working on the Star Trek fiction line and was co-editor with Marco Palmieri for many, many years. And then after Marco was laid off, then she was the sole developmental editor for the line. And so she has worked on Star Trek in print for decades. So she has worked with authors. There are authors that did, book after book after book with her over the years. Mm-hmm. There's authors who, she was the first one who signed them and brought them into the Star Trek world. So, you can't really overestimate what she gave to the Star Trek franchise in print for the last 25 30 years. I don't know, I haven't done the math properly.
You really can't, because the impact, and I think Star Trek talks a lot about that, the impact, it's that line that Mirror Spock tells Kirk, right? One man can make a difference, but one person can make a difference, and you can't deny that Margaret had a huge impact on the community. I mean, there are a lot of people that never realize that, but that's the whole point of editing, right? Is that you're not supposed to realize that, right?
Yeah.
You're just supposed to enjoy it and not see the stuff that Margaret and you and all these wonderful editors, Margot, all these people would go through. You're not supposed to know all that. You're supposed to enjoy the book, right?
Yeah, and for the fans, like now in the age of the internet, I think fans know a lot more about what goes on behind the scenes as far as the names. But even if you don't search it online, you're going to find these names if you read the acknowledgments or dedications in authors' stuff. Then you're going to see them saying, "I thank my editor Margaret Clark," or Marco, or whatever. Right. And that's how you can see these names pop up over and over and over, year after year after year.
Year after year, yeah. And I'd say she's no longer with us. But like I said, her work stands for itself. And speaking about the work, what am I trying to say here? Speaking about the work, Simon and Schuster Pocket Books has made a decision to put you in that place, and I couldn't think of anyone better suited for this role. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I was telling you before we started recording that it has been a head spinning couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Because first there comes this, the shocking, sad news that Margaret has passed,
Right.
and everyone, all of us that kind of work on the inside, so I've been the copy editor for 10 years. I've worked with all the writers. I've known them for years. I'm friends with them. All of us on the inside were emailing each other and just saying, that we just couldn't believe what had happened.
Sure.
And then a couple weeks ago, I got contacted by an editor at Simon and Schuster, and they said we'd like you to step in and take over Margaret's editorial duties. And it's daunting. It's a big job. It's also obviously under sad and trying circumstances. Absolutely. To step in after someone has passed. And but on the other hand, of course, I am very excited for the opportunity.
Right.
But it's big shoes to fill. It's like I'm Margaret had so much more. I mean, obviously I've been working on Star Trek in various ways for a long, long time. But Margaret had all that experience with developing books, contracting books. And so that's something I have to grow into. I'm one thing that makes it slightly less daunting is that I have this great group of friends and writers that I've already been working with for 10 years. And now I'm just working with them in this different capacity, but we already know each other. We know how we work together. So yeah, I'm in the band. I'm working on this new position.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I was a kid, I used to think that, I can do everything on my own. I'm going to make my way in life. But you learn in life that you really don't do anything alone, and all of us are here to just give our positive energy forward to you. But I think, everything that you did with Margaret is there with you. It's not just us. Everything counts. Everything adds up, in my opinion. My humble opinion. So you're the man for the role. You have it. You have what it takes. And I just want to say congratulations. A question I have about just Star Trek in general. It occurs to me that you've been a copy editor, and now you're going to be the lead editor on this. 10 years, a lot has happened in Star Trek in this 10 years span, specifically this 10-year span, right? Because we've had Discovery, which has like a resurgence of Star Trek, and a resurgence of the series, which fed into Star Trek literature. So if you could just talk a little bit about what you've seen as just, being a copy editor, you must have, well, I won't add to that. I just want to ask you, what have you seen that has surprised or even amazed you in Star Trek literature in those 10 years?
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, over the last 20 years, before the new shows started,
right?
So in the previous 20 years, go back 5 years and then go back another 20 years. The fiction, since all the shows were off the air, Paramount had allowed the novelists to continue the stories of the characters beyond the end of the show.
Right.
And the novel lines had developed a web of continuity between the books and the lines, with crossovers and all sorts of things. So they were kind of entwined. Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and so there was a lot of inter-book continuity. So when I first started copy editing, one of the jobs that's special to the Star Trek copy editor is you have to be aware as much as possible, not just of the film stuff, because of course the license is that you can't contradict the filmed canon.
That's right. You can't contradict canon.
But then the books had their own canon that you had to keep an eye on as well, where you could get a manuscript,
right?
And you'd say, oh, but wait a minute, 4 TNG novels ago they said this about so and so, so this doesn't quite fit. Can we, fix that? So that was, part of what I was doing for 10 years. But then when the new shows started, then that was a whole different thing, because then you couldn't, you can't break canon with the TV shows, but when the TV shows are currently on the air, there's new canon every week. So to try to keep those manuscripts from breaking canon, they came up with various ways to try to make it easier. They would do prequels and of course also back in the day when things were more episodic,
right?
You could just write a TOS or a TNG adventure, and you could just say it took place around so and so, and then you would just write, basically an episode.
Yeah, but not.
But with Discovery being very tightly, serialized from start to finish,
right?
It's very hard to find a place to pop in a story, and so then that was, a very different way to approach the novels, but it was exciting. I mean, when Dave Mack did the first Star Trek Discovery tie-in novel, that was, it was being worked on before the show was on the air.
That's right.
And so
that must have been very interesting.
Yeah, so the studio was giving Mac a bunch of advanced information so that he could have a sense of the characters and know what the uniforms looked like, know what the sets looked like. And then when it was coming time for me to copy edit it,
right,
they wanted me to know a little bit about the characters so that I would be able to inform my copy editing. So then, there could sign some NDAs, and then and then I was getting the scripts. As they came out, so I could familiarize myself with the characters. And so that was exciting and bizarre. Wow. My daughter Ella, who's also a lifelong Star Trek fan, she asked me one time, well, does it bum you out that you know the stuff before it happens? And it's like, well, yeah, there are times, it's like, and then for many years I was off the scripts because there was no need for me to do it anymore. I'm back on the script now, but I said to her that really, as soon as I started publishing Star Trek fiction, my relationship to the franchise changed.
Yeah.
And
that's
true. But I can still sit down and watch Star Trek and enjoy it as a fan.
Right.
Even though I also have this other side where I'm on the inside and I'm working with stuff and talking with people and know things that are going to happen before they happen, that sort of thing. And that was one reason I was really looking forward to your autobiography of Benjamin Sisko, was because I was not going to be copy editing it. I was
right. So you didn't know. Right. So
I was able to just sit down and read a Star Trek novel like any fan. And that was great.
Thank you. We don't have a lot of time, but I want to just really briefly touch on, you also have been the copy editor for a little while now for IDW Star Trek's line of comics. And can you just talk about that?
I'm the proofreader.
The proofreader. I'm sorry. Proofreader.
I'm the proofreader.
You still have to go over it, right? I mean, you still have to.
Yep. And so, that was a great opportunity. I've never worked in comics before. but I've got the Star Trek knowledge, and a friend of mine who's done a lot more work in comic books, another freelance editor, she let me know that IDW was looking for a proofreader for the Star Trek line, and so I got in touch with them and got the gig. So since December, I've been the proofreader on the Star Trek comic books, and it's great, great fun. It's reignited my love of comic books. I hadn't been reading a lot of comic books for a while, and now I'm, back into them. And it's just another, I also, there's no time to talk about everything I've done in Star Trek, because I was also on Star Trek Adventures, so.
Oh, that's right. We didn't even get the Star Trek Adventures, right? That's right. And the work that we did together on the Shackleton Expanse and Star Trek Adventures. But that is because of you've done so much. But we're definitely gonna have you back, Scott. If you'll come back. Because it's been a blast. Thank you, man. It's been a real blast talking to you for this hour, and just learning a little, just delving in a little bit into the soul of your story. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you very much. But before I go, I need to say to everyone out there that I want to thank everyone for being a part of this incredible community. And if you're new here, please don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so that you never miss a conversation that we have here on Solo the Story, where we're all about sharing authentic stories from incredible people like Scott Pearson. And if you want to get your brand in front of our loyal, story-driven audience, sponsoring Solo the Story is a unique opportunity to connect with consumers who are not only passionate about real stories, but they are interested in their authentic and diverse perspectives. So whether you're a small business or an individual, our community is engaged and ready to make meaningful connections. Click the link in the show description to sponsor, and visit SyFysisters.com /sponsors to learn more about how you could be a part of our conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Scott. And thank you all. And join us next Tuesday, for another episode from SyFy Sisters, Inc. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.